It's the most important thing happening in the country right now is preventing more people from joining extremist groups. So, that's a very long introduction, so Acacia, sorry for that, but on Twitch we have chat, as you know.
Yes.
So, and you can look at them, and everybody can just enjoy how beautiful she is and that gorgeous background, which is killing all of us. We all want one.
Mhm. I
So
can make
Acacia,
those.
is it you're gonna share it? Yay!
Yeah.
You've you, you've told us a bit before, a very little bit about your history, but in terms of hate, which is what Pretty Hateful is about, can we just start right off with the fact that women aren't allowed to express hatred? And do you think it's that fact which will drive in perhaps a neglected or rebellious young woman directly to a hate group?
Um, I think it could be a factor for some women, not all women, but I do
Mhm,
believe that that definitely could be a factor in it. Um, because anger and hate and what I think a lot of society would deem as quote unquote like ugly feelings.
mhm,
Whereas when you're involved with an extremist organization, those quote unquote ugly feelings are allowed to be expressed and often encouraged to be expressed, even by women. So, to answer your question, I do believe in some circumstances that could be. For me personally, it was not. But
mhm.
anger, anger and hatred, especially anger, and I believe a lot of hatred comes from undealt feelings of fear and anger, both. Um, can be women are supposed to be this happy go lucky nurturers, carers, everything like that. And so at least I know for me, like growing up, like anger is ugly. You're not supposed to express anger. And therefore,
Mhm.
many times growing up from children on, since it's not a nice feeling, many times I think that it is suppressed with women and that we almost aren't allowed to feel it. And
Mhm.
so I do think that in some ways that could be it for some women, not all, but some.
So, and in your experience, you didn't really grow up filled with hate. Are you able to tell us the series of events that ultimately led to you applying to and being accepted into the NSM?
Um, there were several uh different things kind of at play. Um, part of it was that I saw lots of different things.
Mhm,
There were several different things going on in my life at the time. Um, I will say that prior to Charlottesville in 2017, after Trump
mhm,
was elected, we did
mhm.
see a lot more polarization with um, the right and the left. We did see a lot more individuals, I guess, not being allowed to express their uh, their thoughts and feelings. Um,
Mhm.
I also think that after Charlottesville was actually when I became more involved because
Really?
actually, yeah, surprisingly enough, um,
Surprising.
part of that was because after Charlottesville, I had ended a relationship. Prior to Charlottesville, majority of my time and energy had been put into the relationship that I had been in. And therefore, I didn't have any time to be politically active. I didn't have any time other than just my family, my kids, and the relationship that I was in. Um,
Mhm.
the other part of that was because many times, and I know everybody knows this, when Trump said there were good people on both sides, and I agreed. There were good people on both sides. There were also horrible and evil people on both sides. Um,
Mhm.
in my opinion, you can't tell me that a great and upstanding individual is throwing piss balloons, is yelling
Yeah.
and screaming at you not to be hatred while they are yelling and screaming hatred at you. Um, that kind of
Mm.
was kind of the door in for me in a lot of ways.
Mm.
Um, and then, so like I said, my active involvement, I guess you could say, did not happen until early 2018. Um,
Mhm.
I had more time to kind of divest into it. I had met with the area leaders. They had, the NSM had portrayed itself to the public as a white civil rights organization. When I became involved, they had already done away publicly with the swastika.
That's true.
And when I originally met with them, I did not do a lot of the homework that I should have done, but they didn't even really touch on racism, the individuals that I spoke with. It's a perfect example that the the movement, any kind of movement, but especially the far right, will can and will use any narrative to twist to their advantage. Um, it was pressed upon that they were the only people standing up for individuals that were just proud of their heritage, were just proud that they were white. They would say that
Mm.
they weren't racist, that they didn't hate anybody. And
Mhm.
that kind of began my journey. I also noticed that within at least that group in and of itself, that women were able to hold positions of
Mhm.
I wouldn't necessarily say positions of power, but rank uh, positions and everything,
Mhm.
that um, it was encouraged to be empowered in some way, shape, or form. It was
Mhm.
encouraged to stand up for things. So those are the things that kind of led me slowly down that path. And I didn't realize until I was, because I didn't agree with the racism. I didn't agree with the
Right.
swastika. I didn't even know what anti-Semitism was until I was
Mhm.
already involved. And then by that time, I had become so isolated and I didn't even know who to ask, let alone, a lot of them, had you asked them, hey, what is this anti Semitism thing? Why is it that you don't like Jewish people? You would have immediately had been ostracized and looked at like you were crazy,
Yeah.
like you didn't, you really weren't in it. And, but when I did finally get the nerve to ask somebody, uh, it was actually the leader at the time, and he just kind of laughed at me. He's like, "You're kidding, right?" Because he actually thought I was kidding. I'm like, "No, I really don't know." Um, but by that time, I was already completely down the rabbit hole, and
Mm.
I had chosen to put the blinders on
Mm.
and been like, "Well, I agree with 80% of it, or I agree with this 20% of it, this little piece of it. I agree with." But I don't agree with all of these other bad things.
Mhm.
But since I don't agree with the bad things, then I'm still okay. Um, it was just a way of
Yeah.
justifying it, and it was completely wrong and horrible.
Ooh.
Completely. Like, I would, if there is one lesson that I could tell anybody,
Oh.
women or not, it would be, if you do not completely agree with something, you do not, don't do it. Don't do it. There is no justification for it.
That's great advice. It's either all or nothing.
Yeah.
If you have your doubts, you're probably right.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Um, and like I said,
Wow.
before I knew it, I was already involved way more than what I had anticipated at all.
You've told me earlier that I reviewed as much of your articles and interviews as I could. One was extremely emotional when you were speaking about your autistic son being bullied,
Yeah.
or we don't really have to detail that so much, but that was a kind of witnessing of a trauma for you. Second, you've said you, before you knew it, you had given everything up to be in this group.
Mhm.
And so it seems to me that there was one of the main factors in my research for joining an extremist group, because I was a militant activist, is the witnessing of some sort of injustice on the part of a government or some sort of social injustice, and no one did anything about it. A mother's protectiveness in general, or really any parents, to see their child tormented,
Yeah.
and then you add a race factor into that. It isn't that everybody who sees that is going to join the Nazi Party. Hardly the
No.
case. There are 340 something million people. There were perhaps thousands in that party over all those times. So, yeah, it's hardly the case. But when it happens, it seems to me that some sort of injustice that was not addressed of some type was really at the root of it, a breach of trust, a breach of faith. Um, but then you also said, um, without really even understanding a rhetoric, you saw some sort of injustice twice. You had your son, and then you had this sort of, oh, what do we want to say, hypocrisy.
Mhm.
Hey, there are good people on both sides. Oh, there are bad people on both sides. Something about that. And this idea you're a white woman, supposed to be privileged, right?
Right.
Not protected from what you've told me.
Yeah.
Was it two dysfunctional relationships, actually very quite serious,
Um.
uh,
There
in
were.
terms of the injury or the threat to your
Yeah.
safety?
Yeah.
So
I would say
three
that. Yeah.
injustices.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Um. Yeah. I mean, there was definitely the two really horrible relationships, actually. Yeah. And then so there's that, and then also the fact of
mhm.
my son being bullied. We had lived
Yeah.
in a predominantly black neighborhood, which I was perfectly fine with.
Mhm,
Um, I don't think I had ever personally witnessed or felt or been, the subject of any kind of racial injustice before.
mhm,
However, my oldest son is on the autism spectrum, and like he liked to go around the neighborhood and try to make friends with the other kids in the neighborhood. Yeah, somewhat socially awkward, but he just wanted everybody to be their friend. And
mhm,
he would get bullied and the crap beat out of him because he was the only white kid in the neighborhood. So for whatever reason, that was a good enough reason. And on top of it, he's kind of socially awkward too. So you got kind of two things in one, and being one of the only
mhm,
white kids in the neighborhood, and kids would surround him in groups and just pick on him and physically hurt him. And that definitely made a difference with things too, because I never really, growing up, I was never really subjected to any kind of racism. I mean, when the way I was raised is that we were all colored. We're just different colors. And
mhm,
like, so nobody's different from each other. The color of your skin doesn't make you better or less or anything of the sort. And it
mhm,
wasn't until I started seeing him get picked on and beat up for being one of the only white kids in the neighborhood
right.
that it affected me a lot more than what I had imagined. It really did. I think it definitely pushed me more in the direction of the movement because this was happening right around the same time that I was starting to become more active. And of course,
Mm,
you share anything like that with individuals in the movement, and they're like, see, we told you. We told you,
yeah,
you know? So it adds
confirmation
fuel.
bias.
Exactly. Confirmation bias. It just added fuel to the fire. Um, that wasn't
Easy.
necessarily, oh, completely easy. Completely.
Mm.
So it definitely did not help. It added to it um a lot, I would say.
Is it difficult to say, you know, or to admit? I mean, white people, especially on Twitch. I mean, it's you know, uh, capitalism bad, white bad, right?
Right.
um, but as a white person, or even if we took your ethnicity out,
Hmm.
as a person in this country is supposed to have privilege, etc. Is it How difficult is it to admit how frightened you were to have here's a whole group of neo-Nazis telling you, evidently in this case, see, black people hate us. See, black people want a war with us. That was the prevailing propaganda.
Oh
See,
yeah.
all these minorities want us gone, and we're not safe. So, how difficult is it to admit, that kind of fear?
Had you asked me, a couple of months ago or a year ago, I would have said I wasn't afraid at all. Like that
Right,
fear hadn't been a factor at all.
right.
But, when you actually sit down and, look at the bare bones of everything, I do believe, it reaffirms that fear.
Mhm. Mhm.
It reaffirms those underlying issues, like um, that they're going to take our voices away. That's what the movement says even to this day is that,
Mhm.
well, if you are a white individual and
Mhm.
then you have no voice and they are going to take that away. So if you
Mhm.
don't stand with us, then you're against us, which isn't
Mhm.
true, but it definitely is a play that they use. And looking back at it now, it can be very effective if that's the only voices you're listening to.
Mhm. Yeah, that's all you hear, all you see. I know the leader had mentioned one of the things that okay, and I don't know exactly when this affected his leadership, but he mentioned South Africa after apartheid,
Mm-hmm.
and it was where the nationals were going into the farms and murdering families of apartheid
Mm-hmm.
farmers, white families,
Right.
um, which was, I think he was implying that that was a massive confirmation bias for the whole group.
Mm-hmm.
And again, still seems to me, prevailing research is broken family, mental illness. What's the other one? Significant other, I believe, is true. Um, in other words, something happened to my child that made me, or I'm with someone who joined and I joined, or whatever it is. Generational trauma, too.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother was killed by these kind of things. But it still seems in your case that it's this, as the leader had said, it wasn't hate that got most people in, it was love, and this sense of injustice
Yeah.
and a love for your son, a sort of love for your people. If someone were told you're someone, here you are, all right, everyone around you is going to try to commit genocide against you. As an indigenous person, I'm like, mm-hmm.
Right.
except that for 500 years, we sort of know how that works.
Right.
People in privilege don't know how that works. I can't really make concessions, but I find it ironic. Um, and I still see that the theme in your case was a recurring sense of injustice, but also perhaps you said unwilling to admit there was fear, because in the NSM, you're not supposed to have fear.
Right.
You know there's fear. The hatred is sort of the the bullhorn that keeps everybody focused in a certain direction, right? So your experience coming from where experience feeling hatred, and you're sitting in the middle of this group that uses hate as a fuel, right? And you're afraid, and you don't want to admit that, and you're afraid for your son because people are shitty to each other, to be
Mhm.
honest,
Oh yeah.
and really crappy to kids who are different.
Oh yeah.
And you've now believed, confirmation bias. There you're sitting. The hatred in the group. Um, can you talk about, feeling that hatred and realizing what it was and getting out and setting it aside? Was there a difference in the fear and maybe hatred that you felt inside from when you left? And what was that difference? It, in other words, it took a whole lot to get you into a hate group.
Hmm.
You don't get into a hate group and come out without being touched by it.
Right. Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Um, as odd as it is, like when I initially got involved and everything, like,
Mhm,
and like I said before, I didn't necessarily see that fear. I didn't necessarily, like, I saw hatred there. I
mhm,
saw lots of hatred there. But
mhm,
it wasn't just hatred. Um, and I think for me at least, it was more anger
mm,
at the injustices,
mhm,
which then can lead to hate. Um, because a lot of what got me to where I was wasn't just injustices against my son. It wasn't just it was it's very nuanced and very complex in some ways, but to kind of narrow it down, it was a lot of undealt with anger and anger at seeing a lot of injustices, I guess you could say. Um,
yeah,
but
yeah,
you're right.
yeah,
Like you can't become a part of something like that without it touching you and
yeah.
changing you, whether for the better or for the worse or whatever. Um, I
Yeah, go ahead and if you can, I know it's not comfortable.
oh no, it's not comfortable at
Um,
all, but that's okay.
no, and let me tell the chat and yourself, well, I'm a militant activist. You know about my whole background, how
Mhm.
violent that was.
Yeah.
I know how uncomfortable it is, especially as a combat vet. So to have you sit here and be willing to do this is it's got to be said, it's got to be heard, but this needs to be appreciated. Women aren't even supposed to be angry.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to talk about this horrible, traumatic, evil, wicked canker
Right?
growing within us? How are we supposed to come to terms with that disease if we're not allowed to talk about it?
And
So,
that's exactly it. That's
all right.
exactly it.
So take your time. Throw me a safe sign if you're like, nope, that's it. I tap out. It's fine.
No,
If you,
I'm I can do it. And
okay,
if I'm not answering the exact question, feel free to
fine.
interject and go with that.
Well,
But
there's only one. What is it like to feel hatred? And then what is it like to let it go? That's really two sides of one single question, and do tell me anything you can about it, okay?
And actually, I guess I can answer that. Come to
Okay.
think of it, a lot better than what I originally thought I could.
Really? I
um,
hope so. It's
yeah,
just all due
because
respect to you. Let me just be kid gloves with you. You just take your time,
I
and
appreciate it a lot. Um, Part
you're
of what
welcome.
pushed me into it wasn't just the hatred with race and with ethnicity and stuff like that.
Mm,
Those, for me at least, I thought were fairly somewhat simple.
mhm,
Um, I think had I stayed longer, those things would have eventually developed, because anytime you're in an echo chamber, anytime you're in, you know, that
mhm,
bubble with those barriers, it will,
mhm,
it indoctrinates you. And you will eventually, if that's all you surround yourself with, that is
mhm,
what you will become. I had
mhm.
a lot of hatred for the left,
Okay.
and I'm walking on eggshells saying that. So
Well,
hear
we
me
don't
out.
want anybody
No,
giving our guests problems. Look,
right.
so for
Please
chat's
don't.
concerns,
Yes.
if
Please
you're not
don't.
willing to hear your same crap back at you, you don't have the right to say it. So, shh, because we're gonna hear something from someone. So please go ahead.
I was very, very angry that individuals with a different point of view, no matter how horrid it was, were being dehumanized
Mhm,
and were being treated less than. And it honestly, like, being in the movement fueled that into hatred.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
I, you know, honestly, I didn't see it for a long time that that's exactly what it was.
Mhm,
But it's like you said, you can't be involved with a hate group that
mhm,
at its core does have hatred, and that it's festered and indoctrinated, and it is fed there
mhm,
without being touched by it, without it affecting you in some way, shape, or manner. So
mhm,
that was honestly probably the hardest thing for me to let go of, because how in the
um,
world can I be angry at individuals and to the point of hating individuals because they were dehumanizing me to
mhm.
the point that I dehumanized them? I did the same
Wow.
thing that I hated them for. And it took a lot for me to be like, you know what? One, I don't even hold the beliefs of this group that I'm a part of anyway. And two, this isn't the way to live. How, how hypocritical of me
Mhm,
to, you know,
mhm.
completely discount and dehumanize another, you know. And so I guess,
Wow.
yeah, that is a big, and it still is to some degree. Like, I don't hold hatred for those individuals that are on the far left and those individuals that choose to throw piss balloons or choose to try and change somebody's mind by screaming in their faces and doxing them and dehumanizing them. If anything, yeah, it still makes me really angry and upset. But
Mhm,
I also know now that it is okay to be angry. It is what you do with that anger is what counts. And
right.
dehumanizing another individual, whether it's because of their race or ethnicity or political ideology, is not okay. Sit down and listen to that person. Maybe they might have some valid points of view. Maybe they have thought some
Yeah,
things that you haven't thought of. But
yeah.
it's not okay to just discount them because you don't like their political ideology. or because maybe their ideology is wrong. Maybe being a part of the group I was in, it was wrong. And unfortunately, I never expected to become a propagandist. I never expected to be a media director. That's not what I went in there for. Some people go into these things because they want to make a name for themselves. They want to be somebody. That's not
Yeah.
what it was. It just actually kind of fell into my lap because of the skill set that I do have with graphic design and
Yeah.
videography and everything else, that it kind of fell in my lap. The media director left. I was there. They realized I had these skills. I said, okay. But there also came a point that I had to realize that whether or not I agreed with the ideology, I was spreading an entire message. And that message was hateful, and people were using it as a justification to dehumanize and to kill other people. And that was finally when I was like, no, I'm done. I will not
And
be a part of this any longer.
excuse me. And one of the worst moments that culminated in someone who was soaked thoroughly to the marrow in propaganda came with Christchurch. So even me as a journalist, there are certain events that I just will choke on. Can you try to put us in the historical present and bring us back to where you were when you witnessed that and what you thought? Because it was basically only on the news. It wasn't like you were there. But
Right.
when you witnessed it, flipped open the news that day and saw that, and what did you think? If you can.
I had already had my doubts for that because before
Mm-hmm.
Christchurch, we had already started to see as an influx and a spike in um, the violence and
Mm-hmm.
the mass attacks and everything like that. But here, somebody had live streamed as though it was
Yeah,
a video game.
right. Like ISIS.
And in some ways, I would almost say ISIS is horrible. But
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, you almost expect that from a
Mm-hmm.
terrorist group such as ISIS, because
Mm-hmm.
they're very well known for their videos of beheadings and killings and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody to go in and live stream as though it's almost Call of Duty in a sense, almost,
Yeah. Yeah.
and for it to be so much to the fact that because video games have gotten so far advanced, many that I spoke with almost like were almost convinced themselves that it was just like a video game, knowing full well it was
It's
not.
these video games can be like simulation training. The Air Force developed them. I mean, it's true.
Absolutely. Um, Militaries still use, these things as
Yeah, we
training.
do. Yeah, we do.
But I think that was at the point that you hear about the news stories about this attack or that attack. But this was the first time that here we are, all of these people, not only the people that lost their lives, but the individuals of the families that were injured and lost their lives. Like, it
Yeah.
touched so many people. And it brought a whole new awareness to me that this man took this ideology
Mm-hmm.
that I was helping to spread, that I had
Mm.
convinced myself that I wasn't a part of because I didn't agree with it
Ooh.
wholeheartedly,
Ooh.
which
I
is
didn't
very
even realize
dangerous.
that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry about that. I didn't even make that connection. Okay,
Oh,
go
no,
ahead.
it's okay. I had compartmentalized it so much that it was
Oh,
just, I was almost like, it was just like a robot. that I was putting this out there, but I psychologically was not making the connection that this message, this ideology, this exact same thing people were using to justify murdering human beings. And I think it was at that point when Christchurch happened that it finally broke through and it made that connection to where
Mm,
I
mm,
couldn't ignore it. I couldn't
mm,
compartmentalize. It
mm.
completely broke down. It broke through that echo chamber that I had created.
The denial. And here was a white man defending his race exactly as everyone in your group said they were doing.
Yeah. I knew individuals that would say things like that that would be extremely hateful, that would just spew venom and garbage. And but I would say, well, that's not exactly how I feel. But the thing is I didn't stand up and say anything different either.
Well, what do you think would have happened if you had?
Oh, I would have been completely ostracized, and like, yeah, it
Yeah.
wouldn't have been pretty, had I. I mean, but and it's so in
It
that
it
sense,
it would have been pretty hateful if you
it
had said something,
it
right?
would have
Okay.
been pretty hateful, right? Except
Let's try to have one laugh in the middle of this. Okay.
except they would have thought it was pretty hateful against them. Now
Oh, sure.
there's the irony. Um,
Here's pretty being hateful, right? Um, yeah, I don't think that would have gone over well.
no,
What do you imagine the impact of Christchurch had on the NSM members and leader at the time? You you can't speak for them, but what do you speculate it was? Do you think it affected others as profoundly as it did you?
honestly, like I said, and like you said, I can't speak for the others. I know some others that it was
Mhm,
more like you were so isolated in that own echo chamber, almost cult
mhm,
like, that even if it did affect them, the way
mhm,
they dealt with it is you just don't talk about it.
mm.
Others dealt with it and thought it was a good thing, sadly enough. And obviously, those ones I didn't discuss anything with
Well,
because
sure.
I was horrified. Um,
And yet, you were still a propagandist then.
mhm,
So after Christchurch, what and I'm sure everything is out there in public.
mhm.
What did you have to post
Honestly, after
about
Christchurch,
that?
I
Yeah,
had
and on behalf
taken,
of the group, what
right,
did you have to post?
I had taken quite a step back from the media department. Um, and I don't recall, it could be wrong, but I don't recall actually posting anything particularly about the Christchurch event.
Hmm.
I did everything in my power to stay away from it.
Mhm.
Um, Now, what individual people posted on their VK pages and stuff like that, I
Yeah.
honestly tried my best just to stay away from, because
Did any
it would make my stomach churn.
did anyone ask you to address it?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Um,
And um, what authority do you think you would have had to say, I'm not gonna publish anything about it?
I could have probably
I
said no, and they would have
Okay.
just said okay. But if they had wanted something posted, they would have had somebody else do it. So it's not exactly like
Okay.
if I said no, then it wouldn't have gotten done. They would have just found
Okay.
somebody else.
So as you said, it was sort of a rank or status, but not really authority
Correct.
for women. Okay. Even though NSM was very strangely egalitarian about women,
Hmm.
and the dynamic seemed to be if the men wouldn't work with the women, they could leave, but there was active, or I should say, active and passive resistance to a woman in position. I think the media director before you, I heard, was adamantly not going to work with women or something. I could be wrong.
When the media director um, left the group and kind of left the position open, uh, and then it had been decided that I was taking over, refused to even talk to me personally until the leader at that time pretty much told him that, hey, look, this is the person that took over. This is the person that does everything. And you need to talk to her whether you like it or not. And I only spoke with that individual one time, but they did not like the fact that I was a woman and that I had control over this, I guess you could say, or that I was the leader in this position. Um, there were other positions that, I mean, we had women that were regional directors and stuff like that. So when you're in that kind of a position, they have a lot more clout and they have a lot more power. Being like the media director or whatever.
Hmm.
I mean, I didn't necessarily answer to any one individual other than the leader at that time. But like I said, you know, I could not, I could say no to not posting something, but
Hmm.
it was pretty much a dictatorship at the same time to where that was the final ruling. Whatever the leader said, that was the final ruling.
Yeah, NSM, even by the leaders on account, has been described as a dictatorship, which accounts for its security and regulation and its distinctiveness
Mm-hmm.
among groups. It's rather well, it's unusual to say the least. If anybody looks into it, it's like, hmm. Hence, I think it was listed as a domestic terrorist group, definitely a national threat at some point, the organization level of it. So coming in there, did you actually feel okay, as a white woman with this child with special needs, now I feel safer? Did you actually feel safer and more respected? You've
In some
mentioned
ways.
something. Yeah, in some ways. Can you talk about that?
Um, in some ways I did, because at least within the NSM, if somebody disrespected a woman or thought they were going to get away with, you know, being physical towards a woman, they had another thing coming that was
Wow.
not tolerated whatsoever. Um,
Wow.
so in that sense, I think I did feel a sense of security. A it was encouraged that, you know, women do their part, and that, like I said, you know, you could have, if you earned your place as far as being uh, in a leadership role, if those um, what's the word I'm looking
Hmm.
for? Those attributes and were recognized, such as like my skills and being able to do the media stuff and everything else, then you could definitely rise up in ranks. And women were able to do that. Um, so in
Hmm.
that sense, I guess you could say, yeah, I mean, there is a sense of almost empowerment there for women, which a lot of people would
Hmm.
not expect from the far right at all.
Uh-uh. No.
And, you know, there is a sense of security knowing that if something happened with me or something happened with my kids or there is an emergency, all I had to do was make one phone call and I would have people there ready to either defend me and my kids or to help. Um, because in that sense, it was almost kind of like people, almost kind of like a family because
Okay.
you become isolated to the actual world, I guess, the normal
Sure.
society, normal world
The
around you. And these are
citizens'
now
world.
the citizens' world, exactly. And in a sense, it's like kind of like a cult like that because now this has become your family. This is your mission now. And they will be there ready to defend you, much like a family would, with some families, not all. But
Mm.
it's almost like a family type unit, a cult type unit. So in that sense, I think it did provide a sense of security that if ever my kids needed anything or I needed anything, you know. So yeah.
Wow. Um, so when we say that, that is so desirable and appealing to so many women, but yet we have to say it. But they would hear it. What would stop them from calling up their nearest extremist group right now because they or their child is in danger? What would you tell them? There's a caveat to that kind of protection.
Hmm.
And how would you discourage them when it's an imminent need, an urgent need for safety?
There are other means to have safety. There are
Hmm.
other ways to gain that safety and that security. Um,
Okay. What are they? Let's tell them right now what they are so they do not fill that application out.
I mean, one of those ways is the organization that I work with now, Beyond Barriers, because we have resources and people that can help with those kinds of things.
Okay.
We have one of the ladies that works with us has worked with women that have been in domestic abuse relationships that have
Hmm.
dealt with things like that. Obviously, I personally have dealt with things like that. There are resources out there, and you don't have to be afraid and you don't have to be ashamed. It can be very difficult, and it's actually a real tangible thing
Okay.
when you reach out. The other thing is, too, is that it might look appealing on the outside. Like the far right, in one aspect, can be appealing to women because of that, like we discussed, that safety and security thing. You know, you've got people right there, but at what cost? At
Hmm.
what cost are you willing to have that false sense of security? Because,
Let
go ahead.
because let's talk because reasons. Let's
Oh, I
talk
know.
about the costs. Can you specifically outline some of the costs you have experienced or witnessed?
Yeah. Well,
Great. Yeah, take your time. I appreciate. This is really important. Uh, and I'm gonna ask, like I've always said, a bit of a curveball, but I appreciate your willingness.
mhm.
And like I said, you need to tap out, let me know, and I'll shift a bit.
Yeah. No, you're
Okay.
good.
So
Um,
what are the costs?
when I became involved in a lot of it without even realizing it, I completely isolated myself. I thankfully my family was willing to semi sort of walk through it with me. It just became something that we just did not talk about. Still to
That's
this
interesting.
day, we really don't talk about it. They know the work that I do with Beyond Barriers and they know what I do now and they're proud of that. But anything as far as the years that I spent with the movement and stuff, we just don't talk about. But a lot of my other friends and stuff, I completely isolated myself from because now
Um,
this was my new family. This was my new home, I guess you could say, my new security.
because these were your new family. Were there also that you were worried about what they would say, that they would talk you out of it, that they would condemn you?
Yeah, I think in some ways. Um, in some ways, I think it was I. The more involved I got, I knew what the public's opinion was of the group. I also knew that I didn't want to accept that at the time.
Hmm.
And I knew if anybody, any of my friends knew that I was involved with it, yeah, they would most definitely try to talk me out of it because they would just reaffirm what I already knew and I didn't want to face. Um,
Hmm.
in many
How
ways, go ahead.
how much against neo-Nazis do you think your circle actually were?
My immediate circle?
The ones that mattered to you.
Oh, polar opposite almost. It
Really?
very very against. Um,
Wow.
which is why a lot of people didn't even know. I mean, I did a lot of the behind the scenes
Sure.
stuff,
Sure.
and I completely compartmentalized my life. And I, instead of risking the friends that I did have finding out what I was doing, or perhaps that part of my life overlapping, I
Mhm.
just stopped talking to my friends.
Sure.
I just stopped having communication and
Sure.
completely dived into and enveloped myself, which opened up more time to volunteer to be a part of
Sure.
this organization because suddenly I wasn't going out and hanging out with my friends anymore. I was taking all
Mm.
the time I would have maybe had to attend to those relationships and those friendships and putting it completely into the group. I also sacrificed time with my kids that I should have been
Mm.
focusing more on them and what they're doing. And so instead of,
Mm.
nurturing those relationships, I mean, I still took care of my kids and everything else, but I look back at it now and I was spending anywhere between 30 and 40, maybe more hours a week on the media stuff. I look back
Mhm.
at it now and I'm like, I was working and spending almost the equivalent of another full time job working for this organization. That,
So let me
go ahead.
that did this to you. Let me we asked some really rather personal things, a
Hmm.
bit painful. Well, more than a bit, but um again, gaps in research.
Hmm.
I'm a researcher and I find the research inadequate and inaccurate. However, uh in my own personal experience, um with actually as I grew up with several kinds of what they call extremist groups, from gangs to AIM to the skinheads to cults. Um, what I noticed was that kids, and I'm talking about when I grew up, kids were being recruited really young, 8, 9. Wow. Um, and it was the kid who, it was the younger brother, the one that was picked on. It was the one that was bullied. It was like your son. It
Hmm.
was the different one. It was the one who had just moved into town and became the community scapegoat. The foreigner, the outsider, that were the most vulnerable. And what they would say, because I still have a lot of contact with folks from back then, and they'll say, especially the girls, well, you know what? I was always told I was worthless. I was always told I was stupid. I was always told to shut up. I was always told I was not really good at anything. I was always patted on the head. I was always pushed back. And so I figured if they're going to tell me I'm such a big loser, then I might as well become one. And they would all say that. And nobody's ever asked about that. It's not a broken family. This happens in good families, that the baby of the family who's so often ignored because they're sweet, they don't complain, and out the door they go very young because no one really spent the time with them. And they're competing in a family system where the firstborn is the great big glorious hope of the family. This is a dynamic that I see, not a broken family, that is typical American family, almost stereotypical, and that it's the girls that are lost. But I've seen it in the boys as well. Criminal behavior, because from the boys especially, because it was, well, my family always told me I was never going to amount to anything. I figured, what the hell? Um, and with you, you don't say that specifically, but I sense a series of sort of marginalization within your own circles, a series of sort of, you might want to say a social failure. A lot of women feel a bad marriage is their fault. No matter how crazy their partner was, they still somehow manage to blame themselves. I never understood that, but they will still blame themselves
Mhm.
because women are under such social scrutiny and familiar scrutiny. Your
Right.
family didn't want to talk about the NSM, but well, at least Acacia has protection now. I'm just saying. Um, but then, we're very proud of you now for the work you've done. And some of the hurtful questions are, did you ever feel that your family was proud of you before you joined this group?
I think I think there were points in my life that they were very proud of me for things that
Mhm.
I was doing. Obviously, NSM not being one of them. Um, but
Well,
right, just saying.
it's not funny. I'm not gonna
It's
minimize it, but yeah,
no, but seriously, like I think there were several things that they were proud of me for. Um, I also gave them a run for their money sometimes. So
Okay.
there were several things that I'm sure that they were not proud of me for. Um, but
Mhm.
it's interesting because as you're talking, like I'm thinking, and one thing that I've always kind of said that, a lot of extremist groups, the far right, NSM, whatever group, whatever extremism, pop it in there. But especially, within the far right, is that it's kind of a group of misfits. Like we were a group of
Mm.
misfits. Never
Mm.
really, you know, not necessarily bad. Not everybody that got involved, had horrible grades, skipped school, got in trouble,
Mhm.
anything like that. But it's just there, nobody really fit in, which makes it
Mm.
them even more susceptible, I guess you could say,
Sure.
because extremist groups and like the far right, they see that. So then they thrive on it and they feed on it. And then, oh, wait, here you go. You can fit in here. We found a certain spot for you. Um,
Sure.
so
Sure. And I alone love you. That's the cult.
yes,
Without
yes.
us, there's no love,
Yep.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Which a healthy family would never say.
Oh, absolutely not. Like, um, but I think it's all those. I have always said this, we live in a broken world with broken people.
Sure.
Find me one person in this world that hasn't had some heartbreak, that hasn't had some sort of trauma in their life,
Mm.
and it, I don't think any one of them exists because we're all
Mm.
human and we make mistakes and it just is. But it was saying that it's that it's not just the ones that are broken on the outside that get pulled into groups like this. It's not just
Mhm.
ones with the visible wounds and the broken families and the horrible grades or the traumatic experience with another race. It's also the ones that maybe got the really good grades, maybe didn't get noticed because everybody thought everything was okay because they were
Mhm.
quiet and didn't shed their inner struggles or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
I always made really good grades. Like anybody that knows me, like really knows me, that grew up with me or anything like that, for them to find out that I became a part of an extremist group, that I was the propagandist for a hate group,
Yeah. Wow.
they would have never guessed it whatsoever. I mean, and to
Right.
throw a little bit of a
Right.
curve in there, um, my oldest son is named after one of my mentors in college who was a black man.
Mhm.
And then I became a part of a hate group. And
Yeah, even though you didn't hate black people,
exactly.
it I hear this again and again. There's a difference between the white supremacists in
Right.
America and well, let's see, alt-right and far-right.
There's a
Um,
lot of differences. Yeah.
there's those that say I want to defend my race and my people, and they feel for whatever reason that they're under threat, even though they're in power, which I can't understand. Then there are just groups that just want to hurt.
Hmm.
They just want to hurt
Oh
people,
yeah.
and they don't even particularly care what target. They just find something convenient, which again is baffling. If you're going to hurt, hurt. Stop calling names.
Hmm.
Why are you cherry picking?
Right.
Um, there's it's as if racism, which is endemic to the U.S., is what do you say is a convenient excuse.
Hmm.
You know, if I say I do not like Jewish people, I know I'm going to get attention from a whole bunch of other people because where I hear that narrative.
Hmm.
If I say, oh, black people are going to start a civil war and my race is doomed, well, I hear that narrative. I'll join that group and I'm going to get attention from a whole bunch of people. I don't really care what they believe as long as we all believe the same thing. This is a sickness in this country that racism has become a sport.
Yeah. It's also
Um,
kind
yeah,
of kind. It's kind of like the kid that you have a young child. Well, they don't get any positive attention, so any attention
mhm,
is good enough. Not saying that that's like
right.
how it is, but in a lot of times it seems like in the way things have been that, like you said, there there are individuals that are so in need of attention that they are willing to get it from whoever and whatever will give it to them.
Sure. There's even a
And
personality disorder for
mhm,
that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
which is a nightmare.
Mhm.
Um, and theoretically, oh, broken homes most likely to. I'm like, well, then there's resilience.
Mhm.
And then if you look at broken home and the disproportionate number of minorities in prison,
Right.
always blamed on something like a broken home.
Mhm.
And I'm going, no, no, no. Poverty is the number one factor in crime, second only to desperation for like your children or a significant other. You need the money for the surgery. You're going to think about robbing a bank.
Mm. Yep.
You might think about it a lot, you know.
Poverty can push people to do a lot of things that they never would have.
It is the number one factor in fact, in the history of civilization. So, um, and poverty creates its own psychology,
Mm.
feeling of worthlessness, anger, great contempt. It creates physical um, problems that make it extremely difficult to even think straight. You're not
Mm.
eating,
Yep.
right? You're terrified because you can't get anything. The guy next door, he's going to snatch anything you have. You can't even have anything of your own,
Right.
you'll be out there, you know, barefoot on the sidewalk when the ambulance comes. But that's the kind of poverty I've seen in the inner city, the so-called ghetto projects and on reservation with fourth world conditions.
Mm.
So, you don't, people still refuse to see that white people can in fact be living in third and fourth world conditions. It's almost like they're blamed for being poor.
Right.
Blamed for being poor, where minorities are expected to be poor. We're blamed if we try to succeed.
Right.
All right. When it comes to women, oh, get a man. You know,
Mm.
it's still you're only being successful, you only have a degree so you can get married. There's still that unspoken, you're not complete without a successful relationship or children. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, uh, you're still not the white man with the privilege. That whole conversation is so ginormous. But in terms of getting into these groups, you're saying so desperate for attention. Loneliness is one of the most under-researched conditions in the world.
Mhm.
Simple loneliness, let alone fear. If it prolongs time, it becomes chronic. Something has to be done. Creates a kind of cognitive dissonance. So, can you do what researchers can't? Can you give me a guesstimate of how many people in the NSM can be described, okay, in order? The lonely, the I just want to belong, right? The attention seeking, which is the one that's really in it, right?
Mhm.
Um, the fearful who come because they need protection, and then the uh, which includes the fearful of race genocide,
Mhm.
and then the sort of true believer, which has read the dogma,
Right.
you know, believes the
Ideologues.
white race is superior for, and then the actual violent background, broken family, on the spectrum types that are the antisocial or the unsocial. And that's five. So I'll repeat them if you can in order for you. So how
Mhm.
many of them do you think in your experience were in there because they were lonely?
Um, I'd say it's a portion of them. I
Okay.
mean, the lonely, the sense
Misfit.
of misfit. I'd say a lot of them in there are kind of misfit. Now, if that's what
True.
drove them into
True.
it, I
Mm,
don't necessarily think, but being a misfit definitely plays a part. And being a misfit
right.
doesn't necessarily mean that they're socially awkward.
Hmm.
It just means that they don't necessarily fit into whatever box society deems that they should fit into necessarily.
They never really fit in anywhere.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I have known successful bankers, successful, very um successful people that, had very successful careers that were involved in these groups and
Well,
things. And you would have
some of
never
the
have
most
guessed.
powerful people in the world, in fact. Yeah, true. True.
Exactly.
They could still be misfits, though. No
That's
one knows.
that's exactly my point. Like there's a lot of people
Um,
that are misfits that you look at on the outside that are successful and you're like and then suddenly come to find
what's
out that they
missing?
feel like yeah, exactly.
What's missing? Um, okay, now the attention seeker is pretty noticeable. An attention seeker is the loudest and the brightest crayon in the box, right?
Mhm. Yep.
How many attention seekers did you observe in NSM? You were there for
About 2
so many years,
years.
actually right at the cusp as they dissolved, but
Yeah.
how many would take a respectful guess?
As far as like being an attention seeker and stuff like that, honestly, I would say maybe I don't know. I'm horrible at numbers, but maybe I mean there is a portion there for that too, but I would say that would not be the majority.
Yeah, definitely.
Um
Is it in the slim minority?
yeah.
Like one out of every 100 maybe?
I would say it might be a little bit more than that.
Okay.
But it might be like a handful out
Handful,
of,
yeah,
a couple hundred or whatever.
300 or however,
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
Now how big was NSM? How many
NSM,
members?
um, I can't give you an exact amount. I can give you kind of a guesstimate, a couple hundred maybe, um, that I personally was aware of, because they're all across the United States.
Hmm,
So I don't have exact numbers. Um,
Well, it was said to be the largest.
right.
So with so I would assume the chapters had at least 5 to 10 members each, something
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
yeah, because we had chapters in almost, I think, every state in the U.S.
Well,
Um,
that would give us
but
about
you also have to consider that there were a lot of supporters that weren't actual
yeah,
members either.
right, right,
People tend to forget about that portion of it.
right. So everybody who shows up at the rally is not necessarily a member.
Correct.
So there might be 5 guys at a rally, but
Right.
you had 300 people show up waving flags,
Mm-hmm.
watching you.
Right. Right.
Oh boy. Well, yeah, that
Well,
puts a
now.
number anywhere from 3 to 500. Does it really, really, if for, okay, let me go back to the question. I'm gonna ask you something a little bit ridiculous, but
Okay.
the third one, the fear-based,
Mm-hmm.
the people who are actually afraid, like for your son, afraid of their race, fear-based, they came in because of deep concerns for their safety, for the safety of their people. How many of those?
That, I believe, would be the majority.
Yeah,
The majority would come in. Um, One of the biggest hounding points of the NSM used to be illegal immigration,
yeah,
and they would have border patrols and stuff like that. I believe they still do. Um, so people would come in and would be like, "Well, I don't agree with all this Hitler stuff, but you guys are the only ones doing anything about illegal immigration," and that would bring them
sure.
in.
Did
And
they actually work with ICE or any of those?
no,
Because I lived on a border. I
mhm,
kind of never once saw a neo-Nazi show up. Although Arpaio was Joe
because they didn't
Arpaio,
look
who
like
trained
neo
him.
Nazis. They
Hmm?
weren't. They didn't look like neo Nazis. They didn't look like
I
what you
mean,
would
they didn't,
consider
you
neo
know, they
Nazi.
didn't wave a flag. They didn't
No,
make a statement. They didn't represent anything.
no, they would. I know there was done in, yeah, Arizona, and I'm not sure. Like I said, I don't know if they still do it or not, but
Probably.
they would have a couple of groups that would patrol and everything else. But you would
Wow.
probably have thought that they were more like militia than not neo Nazis.
I am interested in that because I live there.
Right.
I actually didn't see that kind of thing. Uh, I know the Border Patrol is extremely strict, and I was curious if members had actually been able to work directly with Border Patrol
I
or
do not
ICE.
believe that they work directly with Border Patrol or ICE. I do recall a couple of instances where they, I guess, found illegal immigrants
Found
that had
someone,
come
yeah.
in, and then they detained them until uh,
Uh,
Border Patrol or whatever.
citizens arrest. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah,
But other
yeah,
than
sure.
that, I was not aware. I don't really, I didn't pay that much attention to anything like that. But I do know that that did occur. But you would
Yeah,
have
it did.
never thought that they were NSM members. It was just, they
No, no,
looked like
no.
militia.
Yeah, I was there. I remember when that hit the news, and they were like good citizens, but that was when Arpaio was still
Mm,
doing his thing out there.
gotcha.
Um, and I remember distinctly going, "We live here.
Mm,
There's nobody here that would do that. Where are they from?"
right.
And it was frightening because we said, "Great, now they've recruited some guy from Minnesota, right, to go
Right.
hunt Mexicans." I mean, that's what it felt like. And
Oh,
it
I'm
was the
sure.
Tohono res went, "That's our job. Thank you very much. Do not endanger your life or well-being." And I think they kind of nipped it in the bud.
Mm,
It's too dangerous. But I remember that one incident in particular about that, and I didn't know that was NSME. Um, we kind of knew, we had an idea of what city that might have been, but that's interesting. It is interesting. It's also 100 and well, that sort of attitude is very old in America. It is interesting. Um, okay, and that was the fear-based, and
yeah.
then we had the uh, what I think you said the broken,
I
where
would
they
say
come
that.
in with
Right. The broken homes
not
and
quite all there.
Yeah, I think that is another, that wouldn't have been the majority. Like I said, I think the majority was more of a fear based of
Sure.
one thing or another, but it all kind of boiled back down whether or not they had a bad instance or a traumatic experience with another race, or if it was
Right.
the fear of illegal immigration or whatever, but it was fear based would be the majority, and they thought they were going to save their people. Um,
Yeah.
However, you did find those that came in from broken homes that
Hmm.
needed a place to belong and couldn't find it anywhere else, that, you know, maybe they
Hmm.
didn't even think about the ideology or anything like that, but here you have a skinhead that's nice to you,
Hmm.
that sees you and you've never been seen before.
Yeah.
Absolutely, there are those in there
Yeah.
also.
So we have, of course, it runs the gamut as all societies do, um, just with a specific direction. Um, Defensive, which necessitates fear and can lead to hatred. And in this case, the NSM and the leader has said that he left the NSM because the fuel for that self defense was hatred. Okay. And at some point, the war chief becomes a peace chief because they realize that hatred and harm, right? You can
Mhm.
defend yourself without them.
Exactly.
You end up getting people killed. And if a peace chief only gets to be a peace chief if he's survived enough war to learn, because you don't get to be old being no fool.
Right.
Okay, so there's this kind of dynamic. I think maybe with several leaders, I'm not sure. But yeah, it is very difficult. You can't pinpoint, especially with a population sample of only 300 people. But I understand NSM actually was very careful in reviewing applications because the leaders was curious as to the motivations,
Hmm.
um, which is it's kind of priceless for research
Right.
um, purposes. But that's all very private information.
Right.
Um, And so Beyond Barriers, I think, works to open doors for people.
Absolutely.
That there can only be transparency if there's safety.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and that it is understood by the group that it was deep concerns that motivated the majority,
Oh, yeah.
not hatred,
Which
not
is
wanting to
developed.
harm. The violence reported statistically is frightening enough. But when we look at a group of only 300 people scattered all throughout the nation, each cell or chapter, let's say it's 5, 10 people, and this is a ridiculous question. Exactly how much violence can 5 or 10 people at a rally manage to pull off so badly that the FBI has to be called in? Maybe it wasn't NSM, but it's
Right.
other groups. We've seen one guy in a car. Okay, I get that. Out of the decades and hundreds of years of groups like this, we've got very few guys in cars. The majority are on the floor, on the ground, kind of like rock'em sock'em robots, all done up. We have mass shooters too. We pull those out because they are the there's too many periods. You can't call a minority. They do the maximum amount of damage, and it's one guy with a bump stock. Unbelievable. But most of these extremist groups aren't one guy with a bump stock like Stephen Paddock. Most
No.
of them are guys that show up at a rally with stuff to kind of hit somebody with. Yeah, it looks like it's uh one of those British sports they have with the bats, you know. But I can't remember. It's not rugby. It's not rugby. Not
um,
cricket. Cricket.
Lacrosse.
No, cricket.
Cricket.
They
Cricket.
play
Yeah.
cricket
Yep.
with the bats and the
Yep.
knee pads. That's what
Yep.
it kind of looks like. Or maybe hockey.
Mm.
Um, all right. So the ridiculous question is, The statistics showing really frightening realities. And then we go to actually look at the numbers of groups. This is the largest. No one's ever said this was not the largest group. You had 300 members.
Well,
Exactly how much damage did NSM do with only 300 members?
it's not necessarily how much damage can a group do
Well,
necessarily. I mean, I know it sounds devastating, 3 to 500 people with the same ideology. People also have to understand that not everybody that's involved is an ideologue. Some of them
true,
are. And not everybody
true,
that's involved is violent. There are
true.
those. So,
So we take 300 people scattered across the country and we narrow those numbers down even further. Let's say each chapter had 10. So we could maybe knock off 2 that don't want to fight. Now you got 8 folks,
mhm,
maybe in each state. Not even, actually. Um, one of the perplexing questions in the research is we assess threat.
mhm,
I'm looking at 8 guys in Arizona doing what exactly at a rally when no member was ever arrested at a rally? You have to ask the ridiculous question. Well, how much damage are these guys actually doing? Are they running around town like Golden Dawn used to, tearing up a marketplace, dragging patients out of hospitals, bopping people's dogs, cutting horses' heads off? What are they doing that is causing Homeland Security, FBI, et cetera, to rank them so highly in domestic terrorism? The question really has to be asked
right.
because the numbers are there. The
Mhm,
numbers are there in terms of numbers of victims and incidences and arrests. Here's NSM, the largest and the longest running, with really very few core members, the ones who would show up to a rally.
mhm.
None of them were arrested. So what damage were, other than what they were saying, we get that. Where was the actual damage? Because on site, a Nazi in this country evokes instant hatred and terror, instantaneous.
I think
Not to
perspective.
minimize that impact, but I need to look at, as a researcher, what harm gets done. There's a tremendous amount of guilt, shame, and remorse from people who technically never lifted a finger. What has happened that is, do you see where I'm saying?
Mhm.
Where is the violence coming from? When does it happen? And then what's the extent of it? We've seen Fields. He wasn't associated to anybody. He wanted to be, okay? But anyway, nobody claims him, so let's put it that way. All right. Let's just say that much. Nobody claimed him. All right. Um, if you took all the Unite the Right people members at the rally, took away all the protesters, all the supporters, and just the rally members, if NSM was the largest at 300, the total number of attendees on the right, with, is it 7 groups, something like that, was roughly 2,000 people. All right, all together in one space for the first time, with 100,000 other individuals sitting there. And it looked like all hell broke loose, right? But when has that ever happened before? The only time I've ever seen something like that go down was when the Hells Angels declared war and they had to shut down, I think it was Chicago, for a week. A section of Chicago, I'm not sure, I could be wrong. I forgot the city, but they had to shut down the city for a week. That's that community, that neighborhood for a week. They barricaded it. That's the only other time I've seen something like that, short of a riot. Okay. So I am kind of perplexed at the numbers. I know it's a long, long explanation, but if you see what I'm saying, I find it too big of a gap to let go of.
Right.
and you came in after the
Mhm.
rally, more or less. You amped it. Well, no, I think you were there uh, in the group at the time, but you amped it up. You
Mhm.
committed more time afterwards. But um, 300 people scattered around that country. Uh, I'm just thinking, unless you went on some kind of bizarre night raid, it would be physically impossible to do the kind of damage that is being reported. So, if we know NSM wasn't responsible, maybe you could speculate on where do you think that degree of damage would have come from? Far right, alt right? What kind of group is capable of that kind of damage? We know the KKK can do it. We
Mhm.
know they can do it, but they do it in a very particular way.
Right.
All right. So, strange fruit.
Mhm.
So, and they burn things.
Mhm.
So, where could that kind of damage come from in your experience? Because it wasn't from NSM, it wasn't from the KKK. You can't out anybody, dox somebody. I get that, but
Right.
maybe
No.
if you speculated a bit, just based on your intuition, can you tell me where that would have bubbled up from?
Now you're talking about the violence that did ensue there in Charlottesville, or are you
There
just
was
talking
two
about in
years of
general?
seriously escalating violence leading into Unite the Right, which we already saw what happened there, so that
Right.
doesn't matter. And then now, as I understand, it's escalated
Mhm.
significantly.
Absolutely.
Homeland Security has now placed extremism on number one, period. It is a national crisis. Jesus Christ.
I think part of that, to be honest with you, is because right now is fertile recruitment grounds for the
Oh,
far right, and the media helps with that because a lot of things become
yeah,
fear based, and movements like this grow exponentially
sure,
when there's fear, and
sure.
they the far right in and of itself thrives on a couple of different factors. Fear
Hmm.
of, like, the white supremacists or the white nationalists are
Hmm.
fear of being silenced, their voices not being heard. And with a lot of the things going on in the news today and everything else, all the far right has to do is like, look, they're silencing you. Look, they're not allowing your voice to be heard. And they have an N right there. And they've got so many different things of censorship
Sure,
and this and that and everything else. So it
sure.
feeds it tremendously.
Well, and then hateful rhetoric being spewed in public by the leader of a
Exactly.
nation, Jesus Christ.
That doesn't help
Whether the
at all,
man
no
knew
matter
it or
who it
not,
is.
yeah. Whether the man realized what he was doing or not, um,
And the other
you
thing
can't take
is
that back.
go ahead.
Yep, you cannot take that back.
No.
That's as much as a clarion call.
Mm,
And I think saying, if you get arrested, I'll take care of it. I'm like, great. It's exactly what they're going to do.
hmm
Okay. We have a little defense fund for you. Actually, wasn't. Then the funding for the disengagement groups actually cut. Oh,
Right?
decisions like that, language like that. When the 30 million people already primed,
Well,
very unhappy with the black president, just on and on and on. Very
right.
unhappy being attacked in public by the alt left politically correct language, which is now
Yep.
institutionalized. It's worked its way into the workplace. You're getting fired because you said a joke that made someone uncomfortable. I can't even tell you how many millions of people lost their jobs or promotions as a result of, or were not hired as a result of,
And
and it just creates this
oh,
cesspool of F you. Okay.
there
Wow. That I can speak from academia and corporate
mhm.
world had been going on for almost a decade.
And it's even worse
Um,
now.
well, like, there's COVID. Everybody's making an excuse
Well, yeah.
to discriminate because it's easy. I'm not hiring now because of COVID. It's
hmm
simple. Um, whatever. We can't even go into it. I can't even
Right,
go into
right.
it. Um, I can ugh, ah, so steam, you know. Um, you get angry, it's easy to get derailed. The first thing I think is, I hate these people.
Mhm.
And you just say it so casually. An indigenous person has to say, you don't say that in public. You don't feel that because you feel it once, it's forever. It's real hard not to feel that right now, which is why I'm asking you to talk about this.
Mhm.
Your story matters a lot to people. You've witnessed violence, you've witnessed hatred, you've witnessed discrimination, prejudice, you've felt it, you walked away from it, you watched it. It was part of your life for so long.
Yeah.
And yet you're sitting here composed and beautiful and articulate and honest. So after that very long trail that it took me, when did the hate begin to break for you? When did you begin the work of letting it go and stopping yourself from feeling it again? How did you do it? That's what people need to know.
Honestly, a lot of it started when I decided for myself that I had to learn that, especially like as a woman, it is okay for something to make you mad. It is okay to be angry sometimes because there are times when anger is warranted.
Mhm,
However, it is how you act and what you do with that anger is what really matters because there are injustices in this world and those injustices should make you angry. However,
mhm,
that does not give you the right to hurt another human being or to dehumanize another or take it out on someone else. Um, so I
okay.
think
How
first it was coming to terms with
mm,
it's okay to feel this. It's okay to feel.
when
Um,
did when did that moment happen? Can you
um,
remember the specifics to yeah?
it was it the process I think started even while I was like in the NSM,
Mhm.
but I think it wasn't until, and actually, I think Christchurch kind of played a role in that
Sure.
because it made me angry.
Yeah.
It made me really angry. And
Wow.
then I started thinking more about it, and I'm like, oh, wait, that's a justifiable anger, but
Wow.
it doesn't
That
mean.
implies,
Go ahead.
that implies that the way you felt before, somewhere in the back of your mind, you knew
Hmm.
the way you felt before was not justified.
Yeah. Vilifying an entire race of people or an entire, people on a political
Mhm.
spectrum
Mhm.
was not correct. And I think I knew it somewhere in my head. Um, but I also didn't
Yeah.
I didn't know how to process it at that time, I think. I didn't
Or
that here this makes me angry. The fact that these individuals are dehumanizing another individual on the political spectrum made me
mhm.
angry and then suddenly a solution presented itself.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the solution that had presented itself was the same thing,
Mm,
just on the other side, really.
Nazi party, same thing on
Yeah,
the other side, sure.
you know,
You just yeah, took a field. And so then Christchurch, that's when you knew
that's
genuine anger and outrage. So something to say to people is that we so casually say hate. And I can stand in front of a person and say, "Are you sure?"
hmm
Because I know what hatred is.
hmm
That doesn't sound like hatred to me. That sounds like pissed off something didn't go your way to me.
hmm
It sounded like convenience to me. And digging down into what is pretty hateful is that hateful is ugly.
absolutely.
There's nothing beautiful about it.
It It burns hard and it burns fast, and it will burn you out if that is what if that is what your motivation is for anything. If hatred and anger motivates you, it will eat you alive. And
Right.
sadly enough, a lot of people that choose to stay in that and choose to go down that route and stay in it, it eats them alive. And then it
Yep.
gets to a point that you have people doing violent things that are like, you know what? If I'm going to go out, I'm going to take as many with me. And you destroy lives, not just your own,
Yeah.
but you destroy hundreds of thousands of innocent lives that didn't deserve it at all.
It didn't
No,
even know who you were. Didn't
no.
even know how you felt.
You hated
Timothy
them because of an
McVeigh.
ideology that
Mm,
you were convinced was right.
yeah. And then one day, some kid gets in her car or goes to church.
Yeah.
Um, and so in combating extremism, and our theory that no hate that motivates most extremists or most white supremacists, etc., but something closer to love, right? But then there is the hate. And if you're using hate to fuel love, it will overtake love. It will eat love alive.
Yeah.
They will, like Green Mile, I quote John Coffey saying he killed them with their love. It will overtake love.
Yeah.
It
It'll
will
eat
consume
it from the
everything.
inside out.
The spirit of hatred once in ancient civilization was called Angra Mainyu, something that could only be allowed out for one night every 5,000 years because of its capacity to destroy nearly creation itself.
Mm-hmm.
Hatred, pure, blind, deaf, voiceless hatred. Wow. That was actually a 6,000-year-old religion belonging to the Sumerians.
Mm.
And this is the idea they brought with them. So that people had to be ever vigilant, never to be hateful, because it would like turning a key in the lock. One
Mm.
more lock opening for this thing. Uh, Remarkable. I wonder what 6,000 years ago they had to feel so hateful about. Why were they so afraid of hatred? I mean, it comes from experience. It's interesting. So suffice it to say, it's something people feel. The leader of NSM had also said, you didn't get very far if you came in motivated by hate because it would burn you out so fast. If you made it 2 years like that, that was remarkable. But yet, the hate is there. Yeah. Go ahead and check your mic.
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Okay, go ahead.
I had to check out for it.
No problem.
Yeah.
So the hate is there even when it's not allowed into the per se, it's still there. And it's ultimately it's the hatred, not the love for, but the hatred that
Right.
has the impact. It's the hatred people remember,
Oh
not the
yeah.
loyalty, not the fear, not the loneliness, not the things we would normally feel compassion for, but the
Right.
hatred.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
What is it going to take to get people to understand that if they want to be remembered, that uh, in a better way for something important, that hatred is probably the wrong way to do it? How do we break hate? Because that's what keeps people at the fringe.
Mm-hmm.
Hatred and fear make it easy to flock to safety. You raise a flag, everybody runs to the bowl,
Right.
which is happening now.
Mm-hmm.
The violence is escalating to the point where these new members have been primed for years to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So they're coming swinging.
Yeah.
unlike the extremist groups before. Now we have a whole new kind of hatred. Great.
Right.
All
Yep.
this research and intervention hasn't made a goddamn bit of difference.
Because it's
So
addressing
now
it
we
from the
have to,
wrong direction. It is
oh,
it is addressing it as though all these people coming in and all these individuals coming in, whether male or female, that they're coming in because they had a broken home, they had a bad experience, and they
yeah.
just flat out hate everybody. And it's not that.
Mm-mm.
If you come at these individuals and are like, you know what, you know, and are addressing it as though it's only hate and trying to convince them otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to listen. They're just going to shut
No.
their ears off and be like, you know what? You're full of it. And they're going to go back. But if you address it and you come at it, from a place of like trying to tap back into like before they came into this, they had to have been somewhat open minded and they had to
Right.
have had some understanding of looking for something else. Because if had they
Right.
not been looking for something else, it would not have they would have never gotten involved. They wouldn't have been questioning anything. But after
Yeah.
you're
They
involved,
had to be looking to find it. It's not like this is easy to
exactly.
access. Exactly. Or get in. Everybody's
Exactly.
paranoid. You can't
Yep.
just open the doors. Right.
Exactly. So the biggest thing is respect, and then also, listen. Just listen. Because if you listen to them, no matter how horrid and how much venom they might be spewing as to what their beliefs are, if you at least listen and you tap into their humanity, 9 times out of 10, they will listen back to you, even if they can't stand what you're saying. I mean, there are those that won't,
Right.
but majority of them will. If you
Yeah.
don't come at them as though they're something that this broken, disfigured thing that needs you to fix them, then they'll listen. Treat them like a human being instead of screaming at them to change their ways. And then, if by chance they decide to change their ways, screaming at them because of what they once were, they'll just go back. Like the
Mhm.
only way to really reach them, and it sounds kind of odd, is through love. However, it's also by showing them the humanity of who they are, of who you are, showing them respect. In the movement,
Mhm.
as odd as it might sound, respect is huge. It is
Sure.
paramount in any kind of a movement like this. Respect for one another, common courtesy is huge. And
Sure.
so just showing them the respect that you expect in return and having a conversation with them, it might not change them overnight. And it rarely anything happens overnight, but it plants seeds. And who
Sure.
knows that those seeds that you plant today might save a life or hundreds of lives tomorrow.
Exactly. As a linguist, especially, there's two things I'm reminded of that are very obscure. But one is it was found in empirical research, actually, observation of children. The children who don't believe that they're being heard will isolate and silence themselves in less than half an hour.
Mm,
That's all it takes.
yep.
Half an hour. If you continuously don't listen, the child's tolerance is just a matter of days or weeks at best. This will become a lifelong habit of silencing oneself if they come to believe that no one is listening. And sometimes I think basically in terms of communication, everybody's my voice, my voice. And I'm like, ain't nobody listening to your voice because you sound just like the other 300 million people. You're saying the same thing. Why don't you people shut up and listen to each other instead?
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that that's it. No one's being listened to. No one knows how.
Yeah,
No one cares enough about learning about someone else besides their own little ego anchored selves to bother to make room in their mind for anyone else, so that most people go around feeling they're not first in no one's heart
right.
and they're never going to be heard. So they might as well pick up the baseball bat, screw it. Too many people willing to play, you know, cowboys and Indians now. It's the American sport.
The other thing is too that I think a lot of people don't realize that also plays into like why it is becoming so violent. And I said this even before I got out, but the deplatforming, the doxing, the not
Cancel
having
culture.
the cancel culture, exactly. That the movement then turns that around to look, they are silencing. Your voice is not going to be
Right,
heard. So now,
right,
not only you already have
right.
many that are involved with because of fear based and, anger, and that all of this stuff is being cultivated, and that, the hatred is now growing. Now people feel as though they are being silenced, even if they aren't saying anything hateful. But if they are, and if they're calling for illegal things, then by all means, absolutely, that they should be stopped. But I'm talking about the individuals that actually aren't saying anything, and they're the movement uses that as a tool to recruit. But it's also the cancel culture creates a whole new level of
Of censorship.
anger
Yeah.
and everything else.
Yeah. And how terrifying is it to an American, ironically, to be silenced?
And not
And
even.
I remember where I grew up, there used to be a saying with the good old boys,
Mm.
uh, that I got my rights. I got my First Amendment. And if you don't listen, I got my Second Amendment, and then I plead the Fifth,
Right?
in
And
that order.
yeah, but like people are being silenced. And I'm not just talking about like censorship, I'm just talking about like those individuals that are being doxxed. They are losing their workplaces, some of them are losing their families.
Sure.
You're
Nobody will
creating
ever
an
listen to
individual.
you.
You're creating an individual with nothing to lose.
That's what I used to say, man. There's nothing better or worse than somebody who's got nothing to people hold them down. Women, for instance, when they become serial killers, are so unbelievably grotesque.
Ugh. Yeah,
Gaddafi would have blushed.
that's pretty sickening.
Um, they're when they kill.
Mm.
There's no, there's no comparison to what they do. It's like, where did you even? It's raw and it's genuine because it's like they don't look stuff up online to find out how. They don't, but what are they exposed to? Seeing themselves being the victims of serial killers all their lives,
Yep.
seeing themselves be the primary target of domestic violence all their lives. So when they kill, it's a lifetime of atrocities. And they sort of don't stop. They don't go out, snatch somebody, bury them in the woods, come back. They don't do that. They carry on for days. They uh days, and they're very indiscriminate in their targets. Um they kind of go on a rampage. When women kill, they sort of go on a killing spree, but
Right.
of particularly grotesque nature. Like often the male partners are stunned at their violence. They're afraid of them.
Mm.
And I'm like, yo, Bonnie's something, huh, Clyde? Didn't count on Bonnie, did you? Um, Unbelievable. One of the most famous female serial killers was the girl whose defense was, "I hate Mondays. I don't like Mondays," is what she said. She
Wow.
opened fired on a school close enough for her to see out of the bedroom window, and with the most cold-blooded, systematic precision, mowed down nearly as many people as she had uh, clips of bullets because her father told her she was a lousy shot. And she stayed home that day.
Wow.
Woke up, sat up, got the gun, waited. That was it. I think she was 16 or 17. They said, "Why'd you do it?" She said, "I don't like Mondays." Nobody talks about her.
Crazy.
It was, I think, in the 70s, a band did a song making fun of it. I don't like Mondays. Um, so there's one example, for instance. That they will frequently attack children is another thing men tend not to do. So it's particularly heinous. Uh, you know. So we need to talk about women's hatred because that's hateful.
Yeah,
You
very
can't
much
tell me
so.
the broken home causes that.
No, that's trying to make it too easy. Like that's trying to paint everything with a broad brush. Like,
Mm.
you know, because I don't see all women from broken homes joining hate groups or going and killing people.
It's the opposite. They're sort of more dependent. Uh, you know, maybe seeking assistance rather than, But then we don't know, really, do we?
Right.
We don't know. So, yeah. And speaking of hatred, we need to get that out, and we need to
Yeah.
get it out of people. They can do what they want and say what they want, but they can't do it fueled by hatred. It's not
No.
going to end well,
For anybody.
but women in particular.
Oh, especially.
So I appreciate your time, and I know we're interrupting your life,
No, you're
but
good.
I hope I'll be looking forward even to reviewing the VOD.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and one last question: if there's a woman out there right now who's starting to feel like they're being pressured to join one of these groups or starting to think this might be a good idea, is there a number they can have to contact you?
Yeah,
Is there a
actually.
way to contact you directly? Talk
Yeah,
to somebody? Okay,
yeah. And I don't know, I can say it on here if you want. You can throw it up in your
sure.
chat. It's 313-288-9282. And you won't just get some recording, you will actually get a person to talk to. Um, and everything is completely confidential. Uh, and also, or if you feel more comfortable emailing, help at beyondbarriersusa.org, and you will get a response back from an actual person, not just, some message shot back at you. And you can either call or text 313-288-9282. And you'll be able to speak with me or another person that we have on staff. Um, yeah. But yeah, definitely,
Okay,
please reach out. Um,
okay. I'm gonna put this
absolutely.
in.
I appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time to, you know,
Well,
delve into all of this because it's very important. And a lot of people think that the far right is a men only movement. Um, it's not. There's a lot of women that are involved not just because their husband or their boyfriend or a friend was involved in it. We are finding more and more women actually being involved. You know, because of political climates. I mean, there's several different. Actually, I was thinking about. I'm probably going to be putting out an article within the next week or so on this actual very topic on the Beyond Barriers website. So definitely stay
Huh.
tuned for that also. But yeah,
Okay. Um, I'll leave the VOD up, which I usually don't do because and then we'll talk some more. We
definitely.
can edit that. Yeah, feel free to edit it and
Hmm.
use it. Um, if you if you think for your own promotional purposes, it would be no problem whatsoever. I'll tell you how to credit it, and we will keep talking with you for sure. For
Absolutely.
sure. This is the first of the series, so we're gonna keep going with this. And you've just given us everyone, I think, so much to think about. But like I always said, you talk from, not about, or I'm not listening. So I have
Absolutely.
enjoyed listening to you. I even know you a bit, but I've very much enjoyed listening to you tonight. Thank you so much for your time and that beautiful background.
Having me. And yeah, I will compliment if anybody would like to have a copy of this background. I'll post it up in your Discord for you and
Oh,
feel free to
goodness.
use it.
Here it comes.
So I will talk with you
Thank you
soon.
so
Thank
much.
you so much.
You have a good night.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.